Hello there, I'm Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. The magic of Christmas making continues in this video as I share another card I created for the Tim Holtz Sizzix 2024 Christmas release. I'm always a sucker for floral and greenery dies, but when I saw the ice skates and snowflake, I knew I needed to pair all of them together in some way. In this video, I'm walking you through the process of how I created this card and sharing loads of tips and tricks along the way. If you're interested in any of the products I'm using in this video, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. I really appreciate it when you shop through those links to support me. If you're only interested in the process and not what supplies I'm using, you can skip ahead to around the 4-minute mark and you'll be close to where the making begins for this card. So for this card, the Tim Holtz Christmas dies that I'm using are the Vault Winter Wishes, Vault Festive Wreath, and Vault Holiday Classics. I'm going to be using this Merry Christmas stencil from Mini Set 32. So I'm going to be using a variety of papers on this card. Instead of doing the die cutting and creating like inky backgrounds or ink smishing the backgrounds to add color, I'm using a variety of colored cardstock. So I've got some silver metallic craft stock, some silver glitter cardstock, and then I've got some of the greens and blues from the Cools craft stock collection, and then I've got a brown from the neutrals, and then this red and yellow from the Warms craft stock collection. I'm also going to be using a little bit of some crochet thread. I don't know what count, like I'm not sure how thick this is, but it's pretty thin. So if you've got just some kind of little string that's really thin will work. The mediums I'm going to be using is Distress Ink and Broken China and Old Paper in Scorched Timber. So I'm going to be using some pops of color in Rudolph Red. And then I'm going to be using Grit Paste Snowfall, some Rock Candy Glitter, and also some Crackle Paste Opaque. And then some of the tools I'll be using are just some foam blending tools, a palette knife, and then just some fine grit sandpaper, or you can use one of the sanding discs from Ranger. For the background of this card, we're going to start with a piece of distressed watercolor cardstock cut to 4 1/8 by 5 7/8. And then we're going to be matting that onto some other papers later on. And we're going to be doing an ink smishing technique, always one of my favorites. And the colors I'm going to be working with are Broken China and Old Paper, Distress Ink. I'm going to start with the Broken China, and we're just going to smush that ink pad onto the craft mat and then spritz that with some water to you want to make sure you spritz it enough to get the little water droplets there, and then you're just going to smush your paper into the ink. And I kind of like to rotate it around and try to get like different spots smushed in as I rotate, so that the because if you smush back into where you've already smushed when it's wet, it's just going to keep blending those colors. So you want to try to kind of go one section at a time, and then you're just going to give that a dry. And you've got some of that ink kind of running off the bottom. You can just tap that off a little bit, or tilt it and let it kind of run and drip more. And so then once that's dry, we're going to do the same thing with some old paper. I'm just going to kind of do it over to the side here. Spritz that with some water, and then we're going to dip into that. So as you can see, I'm just kind of pushing down with this, and then so I'm kind of getting just like sections of the paper into the ink and not trying to get the same area again. All right, and so like if you don't like those little spots, you can always add a little bit of water to that to get that to move. I kind of like a little of that. That's really a personal preference. And then we're just going to dry that again. And this is just a little silicone trivet just to protect my work area here. So anytime you're working with distress inks, what you want to kind of keep in mind, and Tim also shares this, is that when you do a wet ink, like when we were smooshing here, and then if you were to go more wet, whether it's the same color or a different color, those colors are going to blend. But when you do the ink and then dry it and then do more ink or another color of ink, they're going to layer. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. These colors are layering here and just creating lots of texture and interest to the background. So now I'm going to go back into the broken china, but I think I'm going to add a little bit more, just a little bit more, and I'm going to just kind of go dab back into that. So, and just add another layer of that color on top. Now I'm going to dry that. And anytime during this process, like if you wanted to add more water to get colors moving and flowing more after you've smushed it, you can certainly do that. Okay, so that's where our background is at this point. So if you wanted to continue this process and add more layers, you certainly could, or you could just let this be it at this time. I think I'm just going to let it be. I think it looks really pretty at this point. So now we're going to do some stenciling work using some Distress Crackle Paste Opaque. And this is the Merry Christmas stencil by Tim Holtz, and it's from the mini set 32. And I'm just going to kind of stick it down here onto my Altenew sticky mat to just kind of help hold things in place a little bit. You could also use just some washi tape or mint tape to help hold the stencil and paper in place. And then I'm just scraping that onto the back, what is the back of the palette knife. And then we're just going to just rub that over the surface here. I don't like to cover the entire area. I kind of like to put a little paste up in one corner, and then I'm going to move the stencil here. And as you can see, I kind of scraped off some of that excess paste, so that you want to make sure that you're not putting on so much that you can't see the design. Because if you can't see the stencil design anymore, you've got too much paste. So then we're just going to carefully peel that off. And then we're going to put there and get a little more paste onto our palette knife. And then we're going to place it down over into this corner, kind of holding it up a little bit with our fingers. And I'm just going to repeat that same process down here in this corner, just putting some of that paste through the stencil just to add a little interest there. I'm just going to carefully peel that up. And then you want to either put this stencil into like some water and then you can wash it later, or you want to go wash it immediately so that the paste doesn't dry on the stencil, because it's really hard to clean off if you let it dry on there. And then you're going to just set this paper to the side to dry and let this paste crackle. You don't want to try to speed up the crackling or drying process with a heat tool, because it won't crackle if you try to speed it up. So just let it sit to the side and let it dry. The drying time kind of varies depending on the climate you live in. So if it's more humid, it's going to dry slower than in an area where it's more, not so humid. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so now our crackle paste has crackled. I'm gonna let you see how that looks. And if you've got any paste like hanging off the edges here, you can take a pair of scissors and just kind of run that along the edge and trim that off if you want. Or, if you hadn't trimmed your paper down before you did this final size, you could also just, cut through this with your paper trimmer. It won't hurt it any. And then now to finish up this background, we're going to ink the edges of this with some Scorched Timber Distress ink, and then just use a little blending tool and just kind of work around the edges. Now you can see this paper is kind of warped, so you'll have to kind of push that paper down flat, possibly to get that ink on there. And some of it might kind of pop off a little bit, some of that crackle paste as you're applying this, but that's okay. It just adds to that distressed effect, if you ask me. Only thing left to do to this, if you'd like, is to add a little of machine stitching around the outer edge with some white sewing thread, which is what I'll be doing. Now for the background, after I add the machine stitching, then I'm going to mat that onto another piece of just white cardstock. And I'm going to ink the edges of that with some Scorched Timber Distress ink and actually just make like a brown paper. So kind of just making my own custom cardstock here. And you can get as dark or as light as you want, but just kind of, you don't need to get into the center of the paper because it's going to be covered. And here you can see when you lay that on top of it, you've got just your own custom cardstock there. And then I'm gonna mat all of that onto a piece of the blue craft stock. And as you can see, I cut out the center of that paper because why waste this kind of more expensive cardstock? So I can save this and use that for another project. You could also do this part at the beginning and save this piece and use it to cut out your sentiment for the card. So just an idea there. And then to give this a little bit of a distressed edge, I'm gonna just sand it with that sanding disc. And I'm working on a little piece of just a thin packaging material just to protect my craft mat and surface. And then once you're done with that, then all of those pieces will layer together to create the mat for the card. So while the paste is drying, you could then go and do all of your die cutting using the Winter Wishes and Festive Wreath and Holiday Classic die sets is what I used here. So I've got the snowflake here cut from some silver glitter cardstock and the ice skate from some silver metallic craft stock, black craft stock, and some white cardstock. And then all the other die cuts, the greenery and poinsettia here are all cut from different colors of craft stock. And then for the sentiment, I cut it once from the colored craft stock and then once from just a piece of the heavy craft stock. And I'm gonna glue these together just to give that a little more structure and make it a little more sturdy for adhering to my card. But before we do that, I kept the little piece that this sits down into. And I'm going to do just a little bit of distressing here with a Ranger sanding tool, which is just one of my favorite ways to kind of distress this paper. So if you're not familiar with the craft stock, it's a craft paper that has a color printed on one side of it. And so when you sand over it, you'll remove like that top layer of color and reveal that craft paper underneath. And I think that just gives it a really pretty cool distressed effect. It's kind of an easy way to add some distress. You could also, you know, if you don't really like the way this looks, you could certainly skip it. You could also just ink the edges of this if you wanted to as well, like with a brown ink pad or something. And by placing it into this negative from where you cut it, you reduce your risk of like tearing the paper, because when you're rubbing this over it, this will start moving around and it could tear. So just a little trick to help minimize tearing of that. And then I'm also going to do that same thing with this silver craft stock because it's the same. It's a craft paper with the silver printed on it. And then I'm also going to do the same thing with this little detail part that goes on the skates. And these, I just have a little piece of mint tape. You could also put washi tape. And sometimes I'll just do that with like small little die cuts just to keep them together so I don't lose them during the process of getting them from the die cutting to the craft table. So, because I have my craft or my die cut machine is kind of across from me, so I have to get up to do the die cutting, but I kind of like that because it just keeps me from doing too much sitting and breaks it up a little bit for me. I'm really kind of giving these a pretty good scrub with the sanding tool. And this is just a fine grit sandpaper, so if you don't have this, you could also just get some fine grit sandpaper and use that instead. And then to just kind of help that stand out and be aged a little bit more, sometimes I like to rub a little distress ink over it and just darken up the areas. And I think that just really adds a little bit more interest to it. And you can just kind of, you can see here that this is a little more distressed than it was before. But again, like if you want these to look like shiny brand new skates, you could certainly skip this part and leave them that pretty silver color. And as far as the skates themselves, I'm also just gonna lightly ink them with a little of this Scorched Timber Distress ink. And this is just one of the new little mini blending tools. That kind of helps make it a little easier to ink these smaller die cuts. Then from there, I'll just assemble these using some Distress Collage Medium as my liquid adhesive. And then I'll use this just a thin like embroidery crochet thread, and I'll use that to create the laces through here. So now we're going to work on all the greenery pieces, and we're going to add some Snowfall grit paste to this. So this is like a translucent paste that has like a little bit of glitter in there. And then to make it even more glittery, I'm also going to use the glitter duster. So I'm going to put this paste on there first. And then I'm going to spray it with the, and then I'm going to spray it with the glitter. And I'm just going to kind of tap this onto the edges here and there on these different die cuts. And you can put, you know, as little or as much as you want. And then over a trash can, I'm going to spray this glitter just to make it even more sparkly than it is. So it's not necessarily something that you could necessarily see through the camera, but in person, it just makes it a little more sparkly once you add that glitter. And then you're just going to set that to the side and let this dry. Again, you don't really want to try to speed up the drying process with this because the paste will just kind of bubble up on you and get kind of yucky. So we'll just continue that process then with the rest of these die cuts. So if you don't have this Snowfall grit paste, you could also just use regular grit paste and then add the glitter. You could also use, you know, texture paste, any kind of paste that, you know, the glitter could stick to while it's still wet. It would still give you a little bit of that kind of a snowy effect. So you might want to, you know, just play around with what you have instead of feeling like you have to go out and get something new. And then another thing, when you're applying the paste here, like when you're going out on these longer limbs, you could kind of stick your finger underneath there a little bit just to give it a little support, because if you try to do it, sometimes they get a little bendy and then it's hard to get the paste on there. And then another tip is you don't need the paste all the way down to the bottom, because we're going to be creating like a little bouquet with these, and this is going to get covered up as you're tucking those in, and it just adds a lot of extra bulk and it makes it a little bit harder to assemble. That said, if you do get more on there in an area where it's kind of getting in your way to assemble, you can always kind of knock that paste off later on if you need to. This is just some press and seal that I have cut a piece of to put down and try to help kind of push the air out of the jar. So once I get finished, then I just kind of try to smush that back down in there to get any air out, and that'll just kind of help them last a little bit longer. But once you open these jars, they will start drying out. So if you've got them, use them. And the Crackle paste from earlier, I need to get some press and seal in there, but I'll be doing the same thing with that one too. And then the last little bit here, as you might notice, this little berry stem, it comes with little berries that you could cut out and, you know, with some red cardstock and put those on there. But I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of some shimmer to them. So I'm going to use some pops of color. And this is Rudolph red. And I'm just going to squeeze out a little bit of that and kind of create my own little berries on here with these. I thought it would just be a kind of a fun way to add a little shine to it and a little dimension and texture. So just one more little detail. So just one more little detail that you can do or not do, depending on what your time is like, or your patience, or maybe this kind of work is hard for you to do. So you could also just cut these out of red instead of the brown and just go with it that way, or you could just leave them brown. They don't have to have red berries. So just some options for you. And once you have all the pops of color applied, you just want to let these sit to the side to dry. You don't want to try to speed up the drying on these with the heat tool. You just want to let it air dry. And then again, that dry time will just vary depending on how humid your climate is where you live. So now I'm going to work on the embellishments for the card, and I've already assembled the ice skates and added the laces, and then I've adhered them with a little bit of double-sided foam adhesive just to give them a little bit of dimension. And then to create kind of the bouquet that's going to go behind these, I'm using the snowflake as kind of a base to glue things to, and the ice skates are going to go here kind of at the bottom of it. So from there, what I'm going to do is just kind of adhere these various branches using some Distress Collage medium. This is using the My Sweet Petunia precision press, and I've just filled the bottle with the Distress Collage medium, and I'm kind of using the points of the star to help me kind of give me a little guidance on where to adhere these and create my bouquet. So I've started with those little branches there first, kind of as the back layer. Let's get a little more glue on there. Now I'm going to add these branches in. I'm going to kind of put them kind of in the center. And then as those, you know, before you move on, you just want to kind of give that a little bit, a few seconds there to dry, so you're not losing where you've glued things down. So just give that a few seconds. And then from there, you just can kind of keep building up the bouquet. And at this point, I kind of start tucking things in a little bit more. And then again, every now and then you might want to lay the skates on there and just kind of see how things are looking. And again, just give it a little time to dry in between if you need to. And don't be afraid to put more of the collage medium on there than you think you might need, because it's not going to really show up, you know, if it, You just want to make sure you've got enough adhesive on there that it will adhere, especially if you're gluing it on top of some of the grit paste from earlier. And then at this point, you know, you can see it's kind of getting kind of bulky with where or how that everything is getting layered together. So for the flower, you're going to want to use a little bit of some foam adhesive behind there to kind of help pop that up. Plus also that's going to kind of go on top of the skates here. And I'm just using these little squares from scrapbook.com, and I really love these for this sort of thing because they come in different thicknesses. So they've got 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, and 3 millimeter foam adhesive that come in different shapes and just kind of make it easy for creating these kind of projects where you've got all this dimension. And then now we've got the little holly berry or the holly leaves to add in here. And I think I may, those I'm gonna probably adhere a little bit to the, just kind of wherever I can get them to stick. And then as far as these little berries, going to tuck them in here and there as well. So there is a look at our little embellishment cluster that we made for the card. So then that will just get adhered to the card with some liquid adhesive. And then we're going to use a little bit of the foam adhesive to adhere the sentiment here. So these are just some 2 millimeter foam strip. Just cut them to the length you need. And because this die cut's so delicate, I'm kind of putting as much on here as I can just to give it the support, since we're not gluing it flat onto the card. And so then we'll just stick that down and the card will be complete. Here's a look at the completed card. I just love all the layers that were created, from the ink smushed and crackle paste background to the distressed die cutting and look of snow created with the snowfall paste and glitter. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.